Good morning. I'm Reverend Jim Parrish, minister at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Fayetteville, and we welcome you to our Martin Luther King Jr. service, where we celebrate his legacy and his continuing dream. To celebrate that today, we have invited a guest to speak to the continuation of the last piece that he put together was the Poor People's Campaign. This morning we have with us the Reverend Anika Whitfield, who is co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a continuation of this idea of equity and justice and peace for all of us. She is co-chair with Solomon Birchfield, who has joined us also this morning. He's somewhere in this fine Zoom squares somewhere. Hi, Solomon. Anika Whitfield, Reverend Anika, is a native of Little Rock, a product of the Little Rock High School, and she is the daughter of educators, of those who taught in public school. That is very important to her. She went to Washington University in St. Louis and earned a Bachelor of Arts in African and African American Studies in '95. She completed her graduate studies at Dr. William Scholl College of Podiatric Medicine in 2000, earning a Bachelor's of Science in Natural Sciences and a doctorate of Podiatric Medicine. She was honored to be the first African-American female resident at Howard University Hospital in Washington, D.C., and was chosen to serve as chief resident of her program. Throughout her undergraduate and graduate studies, Dr. Whitfield discovered that the lack of access to resources and equity in education was a concern of hers, particularly for students of color and those of lower economic neighborhoods. Because of her determination to be part of change she hoped to see in society, Dr. Whitfield decided to take a year off from practicing medicine and served as a substitute teacher in the Little Rock School District. From then on, she committed to serve her community by volunteering, mentoring, tutoring, and supporting in other ways students and schools within that school district. She became an ordained minister of the Cooperative and Progressive Baptist Church, which helps her further her message. Reverend Dr. Whitfield serves as a founding member and co-chair of Grassroots Arkansas, an organization that advocates for equal education, and is co-chair, as I said, of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival. Please welcome Reverend Dr. Whitfield. Yay. So let's take a moment, take a breath, and I shall call us to worship. In Dr. King's 1957 speech, a speech called Loving Your Enemies, he explains that once people understand that there is good in those who do evil and evil in those who do good, they are less likely to hate their enemies. King goes on to explain that hating your enemies will only hurt and burden our souls. However, a better solution would be to have love and compassion for our enemies. That is a difficulty, I know, but it's one that we as UUs wrestle with in our first principle. Reverend King famously said, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that." Let us light our chalice to these words. Brenda, would you share the words to our covenant?
Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in truth, and to help one another. Thus do we covenant together.
Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired. I am weak. I am worn through the storm, through the night. Lead me on through the night. Take my hand, precious Lord, and lead me home. When my way grows drear, precious Lord, linger near. And when my life is almost gone, on the river, we'll stand. Guard my feet, hold my hand, take my hand, precious Lord, and lead me home, and lead me home.
Afraid that's where the video is going to stop. It's a lovely, wonderful song. Renee and Reverend Anika chose music from Martin Luther King Jr.'s favorite songs that inspired him and comforted him in his work. And that's what we'll be sharing today. And I hope all of us take some comfort and some inspiration from those words. Reverend Anika wants to share this video story for all ages to help her explain her message. So, Reverend Anika?
Thank you, Reverend Jim. If you all would just join in watching.
Our topic for today is life cycle of a butterfly. A butterfly lays eggs on the leaves of a plant. These eggs hatch, and young ones called larvae, or caterpillars, come out of the eggs. The caterpillar first feeds on the eggshell from which it is born. It then starts feeding on the leaves and starts to grow. The caterpillar sheds its skin several times so that it can grow. Once the caterpillar is big enough, it stops eating. It then forms a protective layer around itself. This stage is called chrysalis. In this stage, the caterpillar is now called pupa. The pupa remains motionless in the chrysalis. Inside the chrysalis, the pupa undergoes a series of changes. After about 15 days, a beautiful adult butterfly emerges out of the chrysalis. When the butterfly comes out, its wings are small and wet. The butterfly pumps fluids into its wings to make them strong and to expand. After a few hours, the wings become strong enough and the butterfly is able to fly. series of changes in the life cycle of a butterfly is called metamorphosis.
So I bet you didn't come today expecting to watch a video or a film about the metamorphosis or the life cycles of a butterfly. But I want to tie in that this message is one that reminds us of today's message of transformative love. Just as butterflies produce eggs that hatch caterpillars, humans deliver babies that require nourishment to grow. As caterpillars eat and nourish themselves by food from the source of its birth, so do infants. As young caterpillars and infants cannot digest certain food well, but as our bodies grow, we are able to eat more foods that help us to grow and live naturally in the earth. The more caterpillars and humans eat, they not only grow, but they begin to experience life cycles that allow them to transform from being who and what they once were into becoming something and someone that is not only beautiful, but often able to produce inner strength to do amazing things. The lessons of the butterfly's life cycle, also known as metamorphosis, is a helpful way for us to appreciate the beautiful ways that people can also use their inner strength to do some beautiful and amazing things. Today, as we celebrate Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we will focus on how he used his inner strength to love and do amazing things. We will also learn about a few other people, one who came before him, Mary Church Terrell, and a few that came after him, who have used their inner strength to love in beautiful, amazing, and transforming ways. It is my hope that you will want to grow by eating and learning things that are healthy for you to grow, and develop an inner strength that will give you the ability to do some amazing things in and with the spirit of love that transforms you and creation as well. This is our message for all ages. Amen. America, as we know it, has a long history of denying love to people who are indigenous of this land, people who were brought to this land as property, and people who have migrated to this land from Southern countries seeking safety and refuge. The history is a challenging one to admit, not because it isn't real, but very sadly because it is. When we think about the message we lifted for all ages, the life cycle of a butterfly, the beauty of the process of transforming from an egg to a caterpillar to a pupa and eventually into a butterfly that learns of its ability to now fly, it is difficult not to admire the liberation and the beauty of this story of metamorphosis. Think about it. An egg that once held life breaks open to release that life to be lived outside of itself. And the very thing that sustains the life of this birth caterpillar at its infancy is the very egg that once protected it. The initial story of the metamorphosis, or the cycle of life of the butterfly, starting with the egg and the caterpillar, reminds us of the beauty of simplicity and the delicacy of life. In order for the caterpillar to make it past the first stages of life, it needs a home, the egg, and it requires special nourishment that comes from that same source. Without both, the caterpillar has little chance to live. In America, did you know that there are 5 vacant homes for every person who is without a home to live? Prior to the economic devastation of COVID-19, there were between 8 and 11 million people who were struggling to live without a home. Between 2017 and 2018, 1.5 million public school students experienced having to live without a home. Between 1976 and 2015, the number of annual deportations rose 10 times in America. More than 250 children are removed from their homes or separated from their parents at the America's borders each year. If America truly believes in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, then how does it reconcile with these unfathomable realities that takes life, liberty, and happiness away from certain people? How do we move from the devastating realities of the trauma that has been imposed on Indigenous, African American, or Black, Latinx, and LGBTQ peoples by systems that deny resources necessary in order for us to live and be well? What is required of us in order to do these changing, life threatening realities? How do we transform? Well, I suggest that it requires us to intentionally and consistently practice transformative love. We must transform the current unacceptable policies and practices by using our own voices, our votes, and our actions, holding ourselves and our elected and appointed officials accountable to be the agents of transformative love. This type of transformative love is an active love that we can see in the lives of people like Mary Church Terrell. There's a link to a video that was released on July 2020 by the American Masters Film in their series titled Unladylike 2020, Unsung Women Who Changed America, featuring this phenomenal woman by the name of Mary Church Terrell. And I hope that you will take the time not only to watch it, but will also share it with as many others as you can. Mary Church Terrell was not only an excellent educator, she was an activist and organizer who believed in the power of transformative love. Her actions to organize a campaign and ultimately a movement to overcome the inhumane and unconscionable lynchings of Black men, women, and children in America was but one of her many demonstrations of transformative love. Like Mary Church Terrell, most of us are not moved to transformative love until we are moved from our own complacency. When she was 28 years old, she learned that one of her childhood friends, Thomas Moss, was killed by a lynch mob. She knew that being angry about her friend's brutal death was not enough to bring him back, nor to prevent it from happening to any other person who had been labeled as colored in America. She knew that it was incumbent upon her to use her voice to educate and to organize people to join in public action together. Both Mary Church Terrell and her friend Ida B. Wells were among the first advocates and activists to speak publicly against the thousands of lynchings that were occurring in the United States, or rather in America, in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Transformative love. As a woman born to parents with great wealth and privilege in Memphis, Tennessee, Mary Church Terrell used her resources and her gifts as a means to organize and create organizations that generate transformative love. She advocated for equal access to education. In 1896, she co-founded the National Association for Colored Women, becoming the first president. This association was organized women-led organizations all over the country. Mary Church Terrell coined the motto, "Lifting as we climb," and she embodied that message. She believed in climbing out of the false narratives about people who are of African descent and who were poor. She organized women to realize voting rights and to end segregation. Despite her economic privilege, her educational background and achievements, and proven organizing leadership with women of all backgrounds, she was forced to march at the back in the segregated section during the 1913 Women's Suffrage March, as if she were not one of the key organizers. She was also one of the founding members of the NAACP, determined to help end racial and economic oppression and discrimination against people based on the color of their skin. It was Mary Church Terrell who has been credited with helping organize and lead one of the largest silent marches in America in 1922. Known for using her voice to call for justice, equity, and liberation, this time Mary Church Terrell helped organize the powerful silence of thousands of nonviolent marchers who walked the National Mall, urging the U.S. Congress to stop passing lynching legislation and to pass anti-lynching legislation. Her transformative love continued well into her 80s as she continued to lead sit-ins and protests in Washington, D.C. June 8th, 1953, a year before she transitioned from this world, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of her lawsuit to desegregate restaurants and stores in Washington, D.C. Mary Church Terrell once said, "I cannot help wondering what I might have become and have what might have done if I had lived in a country which had not circumscribed and handicapped me on account of my race, but had allowed me to reach any heights I was able to obtain." The beautiful changes in America that Mary Church Terrell persistently and intentionally organized to realize with her transformative love did not all manifest in her lifetime. But like a beautiful butterfly, her legacy continues through organizing and activism that can be seen throughout this country and globally. As a part of the legacy of Mary Church Terrell and other human rights activists who came before him, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gladly took on the baton when it was passed to him to continue the marathon for justice as one of the most well-known American organizers of the civil rights movement from the late 1950s to 1968. In his book, Strength to Love, a series of sermons written by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we learn that transformative love requires us to not accept the unacceptable by conforming to the ways of this world that denies anyone life, liberty, equity, or love. In his sermon entitled Transform Nonconformist, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. writes, "When we, through compassionless detachment and arrogant individualism, fail to respond to the needs of the underprivileged, the Master says, in as much as ye have done unto one of these, you have done also unto me." Dr. King reminded us that not only does our cycle of life require us to be responsible for ourselves and for our own actions, but we must also demonstrate our love and responsibility for all creation and to the Creator as well. This is the transformative love Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. preached and taught about often. In fact, he did much more than just preach sermons and about transformative love. He lived his adult life organizing for it. In 1967, Dr. King was convinced that his efforts to transform hate and love to fear was missing the emphasis of the people who were suffering the most by systems designed to maintain poverty, racism, and militarism. Dr. King, along with faith leaders throughout the nation and the organized poor, called for a new movement that centered itself around human rights and justice of people who were experiencing preventable sickness and death because of preventable poverty. He and many others formed what became known as the Poor People's Campaign. On April 4th, 1968, while preparing to meet with sanitation workers who he had marched with to be treated with humanity and with human dignity of a livable wage, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated by hate and by fear. This was just a month before the Poor People's Campaign officially launched. Grassroots organizers and interfaith leaders all over the nation continued to organize the Poor People's Campaign, traveling in shifts from most regions of America, setting up the largest encampment of poor people in America, also known as Resurrection City, on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., starting in May of 1968. This campaign set out to draw national attention to the immoral laws, policies, and practices in America that willfully and intentionally created the working poor, the disabled poor, the disenfranchised, the disinherited, and the dispossessed. In that same transformed nonconformist sermon, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. challenges us not to be conformers of policies and practices that oppress, but to be transforming agents of love. He says, Thomas Jefferson wrote, I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of a man. To the conformists and the shapers of the conformist mentality, this must surely sound like a most dangerous and radical doctrine, he wrote. Have we permitted the lamp of independent thought and individualism to become so dim that were Jefferson to write and live by these words today, we would find cause to harass and investigate him? King continues, if Americans permit thought control, business control, and freedom control to continue, we shall surely move within the shadows of fascism. Dr. King's prophetic and liberating voice was a threat to distorted normalities and practices of discrimination, fear, hate, and oppression in this nation and in this world. But like a butterfly who learned to harness its strength, to use its wings to fly, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. used his inner voice to call us to a transformative love that no longer tolerates discrimination of any kind. Transformative love that no longer remains silent when governors choose to use public tax dollars to provide personal, political, economic stability for their wealthy contributors, rather than the personal protective equipment to the poor, the underserved, and the dispossessed. Transformative love that no longer accepts the unacceptable evictions in the midst of a deadly pandemic. Transformative love that no longer accepts the unacceptable hunger in a nation of plenty. Transformative love that no longer accepts the unacceptable losses of life in factories, prisons, nursing homes, school communities, and low to poor wealth neighborhoods, as if some lives should matter in America and others should not. Like Mary Church Terrell, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was not able to live long enough to see the realization not only of his dreams, but of his call for transformative love to reshape the laws, policies, and practices of this nation. In December 2017, Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris and Reverend Dr. William Barber grabbed the baton for justice as co-chairs of the revived Poor People's Campaign in 1968, forming the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. Along with organizing to end systemic poverty, racism, and militarism, Reverend Doctors Barber and Theo Harris and many grassroots organizers and interfaith leaders are also calling for an end to the war economy, to ecological devastation, and to distorted and immoral white evangelical narratives that have been used to divide this nation since the genocide of indigenous peoples of this land. We are calling people to exercise the transformative love at the ballot box to help change the current systems of injustice and erect a new system with persons who are impacted the most by the current one. I'm here with you today to appeal to your inner strength to love and transform yourselves, this nation, and this world. I am here to call you to live on purpose with intentional mindsets and actions to transform your community, this state, this nation, in this world with love that liberates, love that heals, love that nurtures, love that doesn't hold back, love that speaks up to silent injustice, love that is patient and understanding, love that listens and demonstrates compassion, love that forgives but learns from its mistakes so as not to repeat them, love that is intentional, love that is tangible, love that is persistent, love that casts out fear, which is false evidence that appears real, love that endures forever. This is my call. This is the message. This is my prayer. Amen.
Amen. Reverend Anika, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yes, love, love, love. Yes, yes. I was honored to stand beside Jessie Norman when she told the story on the banks of the Arkansas River in 1996 before a huge crowd before the inauguration of Clinton, and after the election of Bill Clinton. And she said that this next hymn that we're about to sing was one of the hymns that comforted the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when he was behind bars, when he had been put in jail. And I'm grateful it's in our hymnal. And it's My Life Flows On in Endless Song. And may that be the case for the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and also for our UUFF congregation who celebrates its 70th birthday this month. Okay. My life goes on in endless song, above earth's lamentation. I hear the ring, the far-off hymn that hails a new creation. Though all the tumult and the strife, I hear the music ringing. It sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? What though the tempest round me roars? I know the truth it liveth. What though the darkness round me close? Songs in the night it giveth. No prison cell and calm, while to that rock I'm clinging. Since love prevails in heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing? When tyrants tremble as they hear the bells of freedom ringing, when friends rejoice both far and near, how can I keep from singing? To prison cell and dungeon vile, our thoughts to them are ringing. When friends by shame are undefiled, how can I keep from singing?
Let us extinguish our chalice to these words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Let us go forth and take the words of Reverend Anika in our hearts and spread them to the world. Reverend Anika, you have some closing words.
Yes, I would just like to encourage us all to move past listening and to move into that transformative love that causes us to act. If you have not already heard about the Poor People's Campaign and today was your first day, I just encourage you to go to poorpeoplescampaign.org to learn even more about ways that you can help transform love, not only in your life, in your community, but in this state, in this nation, and in this world. We have so much work to do, and we can do it together. So I challenge you, I encourage you, I invite you. Let us be a part of the transforming love that transforms all of the things that holds us back to breaking into the newness of life that keeps on giving life, love, liberty, and happiness to all. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Anika. Let us take our wings and fly.
Why should I feel discouraged? Why should the shadows come? Why should my heart feel lonely and long for heavenly home? When Jesus is my portion, my constant friend is He. His eyes is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. His eyes is on the I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free.
Wonderful.